Yeah, that's the way. Okay, but we're just in a normal Zoom right now, right? We're not in the Zoom that we created, the Zoom or the YouTube that we scheduled, correct? So this is just a test. This is just a test of what you're saying. So it will have a different link. That was my question to you last night, is whether it would end up being the same or not. So, okay, well, we're here now, and now I can copy this link and send that out, correct? This link here is what I get that too, but if you don't know why it is, we couldn't do the same thing with the event once it's live. You know what I mean? So, but this, hear me out, right? So we go live with the one that we scheduled, the link that we've already sent out to a bunch of different people. That when I open that up, shouldn't I be able to connect Zoom just to that? Because that's what your video even said too, I think. Okay, okay. All right, but the next thing, obviously, is whether I just, hold on, is whether I just copy. Oh. Is whether I just copy this link to be able to send out or not. This link up at the top.
Password. And it's capital A, capital P is the password.
Oh, okay.
Exactly the same.
Cool.
Yeah.
Are you typing on your video, Devin?
This seems to not be working, but I got another idea if this doesn't work.
Well, just bear with me here. I'm gonna, in WhatsApp, I'm going to text you this link just to make sure. Well, I just sent you the link. So it ends in YJQ. Michael, good to meet you. Good to meet you, sir. No, it's good, right? It says Zoom at the bottom. Okay, it does. So my question is, what link did we send out yesterday that I sent to the developer or to the solution team? So, right, I get that, but my question has always been, if we just went live with the other link that we already set out, that we scheduled, couldn't I just enter the same fees or not into Zoom? Okay, well, I'll be there. Thanks, bye.
Already really far away, so I use that. Bird. I don't know, they're doing a lot of work, please. Maybe they did something. Not popping up with anything. This. Do it, so you're HDMI. Alright. Yeah, just test it on our part. There we go. Jeez.
Yeah. We'll have to keep checking here. We can see the chickens. Well, we got some chicken, yeah. It's not the preferred chicken, that's my problem. And then the only other last thing I have. Okay, we got audio, we got the Zoom, we got the most important part of development, and we've got people that are doing it. Worst case scenario, people can back up to the.
That's 1, 2.
We have to find where we're at. Biggest thing. So. What might be a problem then is that this is. Does the camera need to be hooked up to the computer in order to get people from the panel into Zoom? Yeah, right, so we've only got one computer then to it, right? The problem is that has to be connected basically to that, the camera right there. I need to be able to project preferably from mine. And that's why I have the other screen, I got to be able to project up with a different screen, because I got panelists that I need to go show in, but I've also got presentation I need to go show and in Zoom. Right. The only other last thing, we'll talk about your findings in a second, is whether we could project from Zoom or from YouTube, from your computer or a separate computer. Just don't know, or the presentation, You need to project onto the screen. Or I'm projecting on the screen. Why wouldn't you have Zoom up there? Why do you have YouTube up there? But the people are joining into Zoom, our panelists from around the world are joining in from Zoom. Okay. And then we are projecting live right now in YouTube. Okay.
Ten years ago, it really wasn't really that long. 2014. Just want to make sure, just because I didn't want to get payroll. I didn't want to get payroll, I just want to make sure, that you not been measured up to the same UN today. I'm about to see.
No,
we're I'm just glad to see you going on wise.
No, I'm still here. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Your question, we've got the broadcast figured out. That was the hardest part. Okay. The wrong link that we've been promoting, but I'm gonna take care of that next. Okay.
Yeah, the only other thing would just be,
Share, so we just have to jump between panelists and presentation. So while the panelist is speaking, their presentation will be up, is what it comes down to, right?
right,
So I need to bring up those presentations. And her computer is gonna be attached to this camera. And we're just gonna, we have to kind of, I need to.
I mean, on your. On the show name. Or.
They'll say share screen, so whatever it is that I'm sharing.
No, yeah, screen sharing it too.
If I'm screen sharing shares with YouTube, right? My biggest concern, and it's stupid, right? And that's why I brought the extra, the extra screen, is that you have to find the correct, presentation. You have to display the correct presentation, and which screen do you end up displaying? Am I displaying the podcast room? I should have done right on with the schedule.
Yeah.
We'll figure that out. I can do it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. John, nice to meet you. Hello, man. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, yes. Isabella.
That's good. How are you doing? Good, how are you doing? Good.
You got the standing. Very good. Open my what? I'm there, I'm still broadcasting right now. Okay.
Let's take.
National.
Yeah. I was lost there. Yeah, yeah. No, no, exactly.
Anyway, this is,
Well.
and
Oh, really? I mean, each one of those is different. So,
that's me, that the AC webcam is me.
this is, I mean, I'm not really- but
No,
it's one of them.
hold on, that's the big webcam, right? But there's an edit button up here.
Which is above the or when you have staff.
Yeah, like,
You don't see the,
yeah.
right?
The only other last thing is the lot room, and it's not, it's the only there, but the library.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, the 13. Yeah.
On the invitation, I don't know that, you know, I did that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
But,
No, it doesn't give you any other. The only other thing, is when you can go live. And just fix it basically from there.
I mean, there is a lot of.
I'm not that concerned about it. We're going to have some spill out. There's gonna be, some, people can back out and go to the live portion of YouTube and figure it out. You understand my point? I don't know. I have no idea where I am.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, that takes a while to do. It's fast internet here, for sure. Well, I think that's really important. So I already did it. Okay, I got it. I should back up and that I said. All right, I'm gonna put your phone down just 1 second. Sorry. Okay, so. Okay. Anything else? Do you want to join this really quick? Where? Why don't, I don't care about that. No, I understand inside of YouTube is what you're saying.
Yeah, and then like, that's, right,
Here is that. And you're a speaker. So what is your name? No, there's no option for doing that. Getting those things here. And then I don't. Go to the what option? One second, I got too much background. Hey, 1 second.
And you can try to work.
I need somebody to go into the. There's problems in the. Back out. I'll run regularly, yeah. I'm trying to back out. I need someone trying to do my job. Join here. Right. 1 second. Stay with me. Hold on. Hold on, right?
Yeah, we're working on it. Yeah.
No, I need to give you the link. It's a regular class. I can send you videos. And,
Yeah, I need to
enjoy, I need to.
Right. Yeah, it is.
That's it. No, don't worry about it. Congressional newspaper, regulating the items. March 29th, right. This is one page, you
Yeah.
This is why we have, And, yeah, that's fine, but what I need to.
Thank you very much.
The, Zoom room that I just, sent. Well, in the. it's fine. You did, thank you. Oh, okay. This is one page snapshot of the person. Oh, great. No, that's wow, this one. Now, that's. Well, with.
The same as the.
It's a much easier.
Yeah.
For me.
Thank you.
Player chemical. Although, it goes. No, it is. Yeah, well, I mean, the way I can describe it, it's. One second. Lines. It is, people have to be talking about to get back out, go to the live section. They'll figure it out on the YouTube channel. Right, but I'm now going to send out that new link, this new link. As soon as I get that. I got you. Are you with us or not? I got you. But you're not, I don't see you on the YouTube, but. Fantastic. Now, the only other last thing is that I've got audio, or if you could change your audio to you on the screen.
Okay.
Turn on his mic.
No, he's not. Can you hear me?
So, I need to hang up with you on WhatsApp,
Okay.
okay, because I need to test your audio here.
Can you hear me?
You understand?
Oh, 1 second. Yep. Can you hear me?
I can activate it off.
Am I live on YouTube? Yeah, I'm live on YouTube.
So this is in Zoom. We're projecting Zoom. And it's on the. So go to that. You want. The speakers, you want to go out. To the speakers. And we pop, good here. He's in Zoom right now, and we are projecting on Zoom or in YouTube over there. So, you know, I had to do this, talk. But, you know, I don't, you can't see it, and I, turned him off of, what, we need to be able to get the audio to come through as well. So I need to get the chat out, like, we should be able to hear me at least. Well, but we need to I need to attach your computer to that. I need you in the Zoom room and then attach to that.
Test 1, 2. Benoit,
Yep. Hear
there
me?
you talk for us, please.
Yep. I'm gonna send you a bill for this. Can you hear me?
And I would be lost. But,
Okay, if you can't hear me, I'm gonna go on mute, okay?
Do we need them to do something else?
no.
Okay.
Thank you, Benoit.
Perfect. So I'm gonna get off Zoom now.
but I need you in the Zoom room that we're in right now, that we sent out. Right, I need to inform the team, we've got,
John, can you turn on your camera? Your Zoom camera, your external Zoom camera. I need to check the stream on YouTube.
Yeah, Sean, yeah, we're getting it. I need a minute.
Yeah, John's working on it.
I just need to be able to move around and be able to go from person to person, but that gets ungainly because we need to be able to hook you up. I need you in the Zoom meeting link that we sent to everyone. But you can tell that to go to this, I think. So go to your settings. Now go, don't worry about joining this for a second. If I'm not mistaken, she needs to designate in Zoom for this camera.
Yeah, but I think that's once, is it not popping up?
We haven't even gotten there.
Okay. But I think you would just pin it or something.
So instead of seeing us, you want to change that, so let's see. No.
Can you? I don't know how to do it.
I'll show you, sorry, go to Jeff. And then go. That's wrong. Go to video. There's no,
Near my video.
Maybe it's not, try to grab another one.
well, the worst case scenario is that she, hold on one second. Worst case scenario, she's already in Zoom, short of battery power, she can just turn this towards the people. We don't even need this right now, as long as we.
Yeah,
Right?
technically, yeah.
Right, so we're complicating this by, right, we just face over here. We just face the screen up towards him, you'll be able to see it over here. Right, so let's join the meeting right now, I need to let you in.
I also have.
I know you could switch to them, it would be easier to carry it, if she's gonna be carrying it, it would probably be better with the laptop. But I know once you join the meeting, you could designate that as your camera. But I don't know how to do it before you go in.
Oh, okay.
It looks
Yeah,
Let's try, let's try.
Yeah, like just how you selected your audio back there, yeah, that's how I always do it, I always start it and then select my camera and everything.
You're putting on. We still need that.
Yeah.
What time is this take? 9:30?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wondering if this one might be better.
She's in.
Okay. So yeah, down here. So click on the start video. If they click that arrow. And it should pop up with something else. How do we see it pop up?
The only thing would be a line out here in terms of here, I'm plugging two. Two.
Are you sure you're plugging it into the video and not like a charging port?
And there's only one option from a C perspective. I'll let you do this.
It might turn into just a listener. During speed, like. Is that the plan?
The plan was to
I'll just turn that.
turn this and then maybe have like some speakers.
It might be easier just to hold the laptop, just place it in front of each person. You have a, yeah, try that. Well, you're right when you. Pop right up. That. That's power cable.
Oh, no, that's.
So that's power. You want to connect video to power. So it's powering the camera, but it's not transferring video. Yeah. So it's I guess old mini USB, like old phone cable. So that port in the cabinet is power. Do you have another cable that's like a old, like something to old charging cable or something? It'll look like bigger, I don't know. What it's called. It's yeah, whatever cable. That's yeah. And I think that one is power. Yeah, that might be good.
Then we'll use this.
This is why we didn't have video. That doesn't fit. What is that?
Doesn't.
Or maybe it isn't drawing?
Nice.
No,
No?
no.
Oh.
What is that? It's not USB-C. But yeah, see, that's USB-C.
Yeah.
That is that. Don't know what that is. The first case scenario is just gonna be from the building camera on the laptop. Yeah, I think it's gonna be a situation.
That's USB-C as well on that, right?
What?
That's USB-C on that Mac.
Yeah. But how converted?
Not a converter, it's just a matter of power, whether you can help that fix this for. I have a huge battery about.
I went and brought the power up to the front, so. Yeah, right? So, I good?
Just have to be long enough for her to.
Yeah, I can drop it right in front of the table so she can do it, yeah.
And it'd be for you guys.
If I can never leave the shop. Did you just need one power cable, or do you need like a power strip?
No, I think that'll be.
So just plug into there, I'll run it to like here, so then you can go in the place. That'll work. The only, yeah, the only kid I have question wise is YouTube wise. Because what I'm showing the world is rather than having to check the machine, we can end up making sure that the screen is out there. And then what we have is up, and this is the reason why we've got a whole half hour, is that from a presentation perspective, I need to make sure that,
Start again.
Yeah, testing, talking.
I give us a sec, there's a delay, so you're still walking around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. One time. Yeah. Good. Is that?
Well, yeah.
I think that's good. I think that's-
So we did a whiteboard there. That's something we want to- Share. That went on all the those. I know. Forward ball, yeah, the whole. You only have one recommendation. Is, which, yes. It would come from you. Yes, sir. You need to know about what I'm saying, there's all the. Yeah, now I'm more. It's a lot, because to pick it on, this stuff, we don't need to people that we have to cover all, but. No, right, I can't look at it, but now that's 20 minutes. So
Yes.
once upon a second, I did well, but what about everyone? Do anything with the further. Start with the bottom. So first of all. My wife and I actually. Okay. So that's. It's more like. It's like, you know, my feet, that's. You have a mountain view. That will be like- I go to that. Yeah. Frederick's become a little bit, but that's still Frederick, he lived in Frederick for a while. Not using you need this. But it's fair.
And we kind of figured out. I got him out there like 40 years. And I was
And then, well, I mean, that's the other thing about.
Lawyers and. Yeah, I went to university. Yeah. Yeah, and really not being there.
And, you know,
And really know how I'm going to.
and I don't think it's a lot about,
Yeah. Are you going to do your arm on the?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's fine. You've got that. You don't go to the level testing. They are. It's weirdly. I will not going to talk about this that I'm setting up right now, but it is at the bottom of this, you know, that is. So it's a.
And definitely kind of wonder some people kind of like, well, there's jobs available.
Yeah.
Oh, no. That, you get in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right now.
Yep.
I don't know with that. I mean, I can see it. I'm one of those, you know, I'm not getting them.
Yeah, what is one?
But, you know, it gives us great. Yeah, that's what you like. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
it just sounded like an MP.
And there's more. It doesn't change.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I did. It's on 28, row 28. It's called All Slides.
All presentations are all slides
All slides. It's just called All Slides. Yeah,
in the order of how they.
yeah, it's just in one presentation deck. So you just have to click through. You don't have to click anything else.
Not as good as Kevin, but. Yeah. Turn out tweaking it down, take a little out, maintenance, et cetera. It's not extraordinary, but the others are moving. We're not going to use. Probably get down a little bit, but since we see the delay, it is, when you do think out the second here, not taking that slide, but there.
All right, the email has been sent, the link. Close this. Open Zoom.
Give that right now, they know the copy. Works for me. I think it's like that, but I just. In the order that, we presented. It's like. The title slides as we get.
No, only.
Yeah. Research. I'd like to hear the rest of this. I think it's really small. I have my way.
Okay, I'll let them know. It's my.
On the computer in front of the. Yeah. We're just gonna end up switching that from one house. Okay. Yeah, we've got, the presentation from the maker, you're doing great work. I didn't get it. Same view, they were, instead of sign, it's on the side program. I remember 9:35. No, I know.
Mic 1, check. Mic 2, check. 3, check. Mic 4, check. Mic 5, check.
Can you hear me?
I just talking to Mike. Hi all, thank you for coming. And just a reminder to stay on mute until you present, just to get rid of any background noise. Thank you so much.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
All set. Okay. Is it working? Is it working? Okay. Good morning. Welcome to all of you for our briefing. My name is Sanjay Puri. On behalf of Regulating AI, I really want to welcome you all. Regulating AI is a nonprofit. Our focus is really on bringing as many diverse voices, as many multiple voices to the framing of AI regulation, and also being a resource for information and education to policymakers and legislators around the world. Today for our briefing, we have two panels. The first panel is on non-US approaches to regulating AI. And the second panel is on ethical considerations for AI. The first panel is going to be moderated by me, and the second by Michael Taylor, who is the head of government affairs for regulating AI. Each panel is an hour, and we'll have a short break between. And just from your perspective, to understand that today we stand really at the precipice of an era where artificial intelligence is all pervasive in everything that we do. And so if that is the case, for such a transformative technology, we need to have a really strategic, thoughtful way of getting a proper framework for regulating AI. So just to set the stage for the first panel, it's really important that we talk to our international collaborators, learn from their experiences in regulating AI, so that we can have a more insightful way of our own regulations, as well as build a framework towards global governance. So I'm really excited for our first panel. We have some amazing speakers that we have lined up. We are covering about 70% of the population of the world with our three panelists. We have Africa, we have Europe, and we have India. And so for the first panelist, he is the former Prime Minister of Finland, Mr. Esko Aho, who is going to provide us the European Union's perspective on AI regulation. And then we have Dr. Shiko Gitau. She's the CEO of Kwahala, a digital innovation company. She is going to provide us the African Union's perspective on AI regulation. And then we have from India, we have two co-panelists. We have Sharat Sharma, the co-founder of iSpirit Foundation, a non-profit technology think tank, and Avik Sarkar, a senior academic from the Indian School of Business, who will shed light on India's approach to AI regulations. And this will really give us some broad idea of what the rest of the world is doing as we at the United States, right here in this building and other buildings on Capitol Hill, work to really formulating AI regulations. Each panelist, each region will have about 10 minutes to give their presentation. Then we'll have a 30-minute Q&A that I'll be moderating. And then we'll have a little bit of a break before we begin the second panel. Without further ado, let us embark on this conversation and learn from the global perspectives that we have. And we will start with Dr. Shiko Gitau to give us her perspective of African Union's approach on AI regulation. Dr. Shiko, please let us have your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. It's afternoon here, and thank you so much for having me. I'm waiting for my deck to be put on. Thank you. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me this morning. So just for clarification, I'll be presenting some Africans' perspective on AI regulation, which will include some take on the AU's approach to AI regulation. So when I was thinking about what to present this, I remembered of something that we've been talking about and I presented earlier is what is the basis of AI regulation? And it's around sovereignty, inclusivity, and innovation. And for us as Africa, it's the tango of Africa's AI regulation or lack thereof. And that's going to be my talking about today, what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm not sure if I can run my own slides. No. So next, if you can put it on presentation mode, that would be great. Are you able to put full screen? Anyway, so when people hear about AI, and every time people are speaking about AI, they are speaking about AI in isolation. But you have to think about AI in the digital transformation universe. AI is part of this big digital transformation push that has been happening for a couple of decades now, at least on our continent. At the center of it is people. There are things like the internet itself, smart devices, data centers, and AI is part of that universe that we talk about, hence my background, just talking about the universe. But what exactly is, next please, but what what makes up the digital transformation universe? And when you talk about AI and these all fancy images that come to your mind, please, next slide, please, that come to your mind. We talk about augmented reality. We talk about being able to quickly connect, social media, all of these things. But when I think about AI, I want to go back to the first principles of digital transformation. If you can skip 2 slides in. The next one. We start with the basic principles of what makes up, no, back one. We start with the basic principles of what makes up digital. And we started with hardware, operating systems, middleware, what we call API now, application, and the user interface. This is when we're doing computer science, anybody who did a technology related degree, this is very familiar to you. So if you're to use this as our first principle in thinking about digital transformation and translate this into the universe of digital transformation, it looks like this. Now next. Is it possible I can share my deck? Okay, so it starts with infrastructure. So there is no digital transformation without infrastructure. And infrastructure here means for everything from power, electricity to connectivity, to devices, to services, which is what we experience, applications and skills. But all of this is surrounded by, on one side, by people, on the other hand, the processes that we use to operate these things. This is our universe of digital transformation. But where does AI actually fall into this? Where does AI fall into this? Next. Yeah, there. So data is the fuel behind AI. And as we're looking at this, we realize that data sits right in the middle of the stack. It's on one hand, data is fed through connectivity, infrastructure, and devices. But data also fits the services, application, and skills that are being built. So on one hand is AI needs the bottom half of the stack, and AI is used by the top half of the stack. However, people are everywhere and processes are everywhere. So this is just the first principles to give you just a background before I jump into Africa. Next. So why regulation? Why do we regulate? Going back to that question I started with, what are we regulating and why are we regulating? as I mentioned in my beginning, it's about sovereignty, inclusivity, and innovation. Those are the three things that we're innovating. We look at the EU. The EU are talking about the rights of their people, including everyone, everywhere. Sovereignty is about who is building what, where, and why. And innovation is how fast can we innovate and be commercially viable and be able to sell and change the world. That's the next slide I'm talking through. Yeah, so this is a slide. Okay. So it's about sovereignty. It's a tangle between sovereignty, inclusion, and innovation. So those are the three things that every AI regulation, policy, framework, documentation is talking about. At the base of it, the first principles of it is about those three things. Next. So what is sovereignty? We know sovereignty is the ability of a person or an entity to be able to define their own destiny and the future. That is the overall definition. But when it comes to digital, what does this actually mean? Next. We look at it first from a digital sovereignty. Digital sovereignty is made of two things, data sovereignty and technological sovereignty. And it's about geography, where, operation, who, and regulation, how. So, and I won't go into each of those details. It's about what is the data, where it's being computed, and how it's being computed. And it's who and who is doing this. So it is about technology and sovereignty. Then when you think about AI sovereignty, it's a combination of both data and technology. We've already said that data sits at the technological stack right in the middle. Next. Yeah, so we've already said that it's about data and technology. But if you are to look at the full definition of sovereignty, there's a quick aspect that is left out when you just think about it from just a purely digital sovereignty point of view, and it's the people aspect, the human being part of it. Next. Sorry for this. So it's the human part of it. So we need to be able to think about AI sovereignty from the technology part of it, the data part of it, but also the human part of it. How are we utilizing it? Is it moving the needle for us? And I'm speaking from an African perspective. Is it changing my health outcomes, my education outcomes, my life's outcome in general? And that's something that we need to put at the center of it, even as we are defining sovereignty. And that's why in our team, we've added humans as a core part of it. Next. So the next one is very easy. It's what I think has been the bane of many people's conversations around AI, and it's inclusivity. And I want to call it out and spell it out because I think it's important for me to read it out. It's the equitable, meaningful, and safe access to use, lead, and design of digital technologies, services, and associated opportunities for everyone, everywhere. And that has been, when you hear about trust, when you hear about responsible use of AI, it's primarily around the idea of it being inclusive. It's everyone, everywhere being able to be afforded the opportunities to be able to use technology in a very meaningful and safe way. And when you're thinking about that, and when you're thinking about this, I'm thinking this from an African perspective. What does this actually mean? And I'll come to that. And finally, about innovation. Next slide. So I won't go about to innovation a lot because it's a lot, but innovation is ability to build and create, yeah? And it has many things. There's user centricity, business model, disruption, collaboration, and all of these things that create the idea of digital innovation. And this is one of the other things, especially in the US, because you're sitting in the US and I'm speaking to a primary US audience. Innovation is the DNA of the American people. Yeah, you want to be able to innovate, you want to change the world. When I worked in the US, it was about changing the world and basically being the core of changing the world, setting the pace for the world. And this is one of the key things that have been debated upon. And what I have admired about especially the US is while there's push for regulation, there's also push for greater innovation. There's the consortia that has just been formed by the big tech and small tech and government to actually increase innovation in the AI space. So regulation also could and should actually push for greater innovation. All may not be supporting for that. So then I want to bring it back to Africa and why the current thinking about regulation is there in Africa. And this is what we say ground realities in Africa. Next, please. So yeah, so what in Africa? The next slide. So I want to just show for you a few things. Next slide, please. So how are we doing in Africa? There's only one data center in Africa. It's based out in Morocco. There are 95 data centers on the continent, less than 2% of the world's data centers. When it comes to regulation, there are only 5 countries on the continent that have actually put anything in place in terms of policy. And just 2 weeks ago, a whole chunk of the West African coast was offline because our cables were cut. So when you talk about sovereignty, given the definition that we've given, this is where we stand, yeah? Most of the compute that we rely on the continent does not sit on the continent. Most of our data does not sit on the continent. Right now, regulation is not existent, and our connectivity is still very, very sketchy. So when we think about sovereignty, we have to look at these things in wholesome, not just in bite sizes. Next. And the most important of this is talent flow. So when I was preparing for this, somebody sent me this paper around talent flowing onto the continent, or the AI talent flow. As you can see, most of the talent is from and to the US. And we only have South Africa and North Africa, which is Algeria, Morocco, up there having some sort of talent, which is primarily, again, in the US and working on the US. And Morocco, because they have that one supercomputer, they're able to attract some talent. And we keep asking ourselves, who is building AI? What does AI look like on the continent? What are we really regulating if most of our talent is not actually working on the continent and innovation is not happening on the continent? Next. And inclusivity, I emphasize on that definition because I wanted you to see this picture. It's one of the most powerful things I've seen every time I do my work. This is the world's map at night. Apart from a bit of South Africa and North Africa, most of the continent just does not exist. I have a similar image that shows the data sets that are flowing in and out of the continent. Africa only contributes to 2% of the data that is influencing research in the globe. So on inclusivity in how the data, how AI and models are being built is still very, very far and is still not very inclusive of the African continent. And number 3, the last one is about innovation, which is the next slide. And I'll speak through it. The last one is innovation. And I picked the last global innovation index. And I was looking at where is the first African country. It's at number 59, and that's South Africa. And the next one is 85. And the rest of us are after the number 100, the ones that actually made it to the list. Which means while innovation is happening, it is not recognized in a way that we can be able to start talking about regulating how we are doing innovation, because there's not much of an innovation AI ecosystem or ecosystem to regulate at this point. Next. So how should we be regulating? Because we agree there's need for some guardrails. How should we be regulating, and how is the world regulating? And now here I'm speaking to the choir. There are 2 ways that the world is regulating. You are either regulating for the risk, or you're regulating for the potential. I like this, we call it the McKinsey matrix, right? And when you say one side is risk, the other one is potential, inside there is right-based, market-based, state-based, and opportunity-based, yeah? Right-based is where I'm fighting for the rights of my people, the rights of my data, the rights of who we are as a people. That's the sovereignty, and some people call it geopolitics part of it. Market-based is you're fighting for the innovation part of it, right? What is the innovation that is coming out of AI? What is the commercial viability? What is the market size of AI? So anybody who is speaking about that, they're looking at the market-based one. State-based, we know these are people, these are countries and regions that are looking at controlling the speed and the strength of it. So we know, for example, China and some other countries in Asia are actually doing very state-based approaches to AI. And there's opportunity-based, which everybody wants to be part of, but everybody is scared about because it is a free for all type of approach. So how did I organize the world in this next? So this is how I organize the world. So I said EU is right-based. And I just had a couple of conversations with people in Germany specifically, and they're saying while the world is adapting to Copilot on everything, we have a Copilot for everything these days. In Germany, in many organizations, they have not co-piloted anything because they are afraid of where their data is going to land, who is going to be using it, what are they training, are they protecting the humanness and humanhood of their people. So co-pilots have not taken as fast as possible in EU because they're still looking at protecting the rights of the people. The US is split between market and opportunity based. The US is like, is technology going to take the world? Is AI going to replace our humanhood? Can we slow down the development of AI so that we can make sure that we are protecting ourselves as human beings? State, on the other hand, is on this line between uncertainty and certainty is, oh, we want to be able to build and protect our people and protect, and it's not just protecting our people, it's protect our sovereignty as a country, but also be able to build on potential. And we can see most of the writings and the papers and regulations and policies from China are leaning towards that. They want to innovate and create make market-based innovation, but also on the other hand, they want to keep their sovereignty intact. And most of the global majority is on that last part, yeah, on the opportunity base. We are on a wait and see where this is going to go, how should we regulate? And many of the African regulators I've spoken to are saying, should we regulate because EU and US are our trade partners, or should we allow ourselves to not regulate and see where this takes us? And those are the questions that many of them are grappling on because they want to align with trade partners. But on the other hand, we don't know where this is going to take. And if we regulate too early, is it going to impede the potential of this in actually changing the world? Because everybody sees this as a real opportunity for all of us to actually leapfrog our development, because it's the one thing that, apart from the things that we just talked about, that has the opportunity and the potential to actually leapfrog our continent into something amazing. Next. So I will introduce something, and I will the team at Regulate AI will share the paper with everyone. It's something that we've developed called the Four Horsemen Framework on AI regulations on the continent of Africa. And it looks at 4 components around how to approach AI regulation. And it's building an ecosystem that will, again, go around the universe and create this universe, make AI as part of our universe. The first one is data sets. I ignore the labeling of the diagram, but the first part of it is data sets. Data is the foundation of any AI model. Yeah, we cannot do any AI. And as I showed you, there are not enough data sets on the continent to be able to start influencing that. In fact, I was in the US just a couple of weeks ago, and one of the key things one of the use cases we are trying to build is around health. And we couldn't build this mental health bot because we are unable to be able to translate from one language to English and then back to that language, because it loses total context and you might be giving the wrong advice because the translation just lost context of a question that somebody was asking. Number 2 is compute. As I mentioned, there's only one supercomputer on the continent, so we are highly relying on a supercomputing sitting somewhere in Nevada, to be totally honest, right? And number 3 is talent. You can see the flow of talent across the continent. They're basically jumping the continent and going between Europe and the US. So that is something it's a dynamic that needs to be solved. And finally is market. This is my most exciting days is when I'm talking to registrar or commercial leaders, when they talk about how can we use AI to change the lives of our people? What are the viable use cases to drive development using AI? And there is already a huge appreciation of what AI can do, but we need to solve for the other three things that are needed. And then finally, regulation. Regulation comes to embed and protect this ecosystem that we're already building. So what has the AU done? The AU has done some amazing work around building some guidelines around AI regulation. And if you read the paper, I believe that the team will share both the paper, our paper, but also the paper from AU. We share this idea of building the ecosystem, but also giving guidelines to African governments on what to do, which is the next slide. Next slide, please. It is to build an AI policy and implementation, because there's need for that. It lacks. Only 5 countries have done it. Yeah, invest in policies, right? AI training and education, and I can't overemphasize on this because we need a pipeline of talent. Then create a supportive environment for AI innovation. And this is everything from the use cases themselves to the LLMs that we are trying to build. Prioritize funding. We need, and one of the key things that we've been talking with a couple of people is how do we build like shared compute power for regions on the continent? Instead of just having one in Morocco, can we have one for Eastern Africa, one for Western Africa, one for Central and one for Southern Africa? So our researchers and our scientists can be able to come and build for the continent. And finally, of course, is ensure ethical and responsible use of AI, which is a big thing. And I'll give you just a simple example. The biggest one here is impersonation and deep fakes, which is a big problem at the moment because of social media sharing. So those are the key actions that African governments are doing. But because I had these platforms to challenge you and you're going to influence your Congress people, this is my challenge to you. The next slide, please, is what can the US do in this drive towards increasing AI adoption, especially from a very market-driven point of view, is support in building an end-to-end talent pipeline. I feel like if we have the talent, we'll solve for our data sets. Yeah. And number 2 is collaborate and partner in infrastructure development, mostly because it's just very expensive. Yeah. Putting up a supercompute. I mean, and we've heard from what's his name, Sam Altman. He's trying to raise $7 trillion. Those are the kinds of money that a private sector company that is trying to raise to support its own supercompute power. The continent actually needs support in doing some of that. And I have a challenge for you. Africa has the greenest energy. In fact, Kenya, because I'm speaking from Kenya and I'm Kenyan, has 98% green power. Setting up some of those data centers and supercomputers on the continent to support the world, because we are greening the world, but also we are supporting this evolution. Those are my call to action for you, and thank you very much for having me. Last slide. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shiko, for this very insightful presentation to give us a real view on what the African Union is doing in terms of AI regulation. Now we'll turn to Europe and the European Union's perspective on AI regulation, and we'll have Mr. Asko Aho give us his viewpoint on what the EU is doing. Asko Aho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for inviting me to join this discussion. I think the topic is really, really exciting one and important one as well. Maybe I will say a few words about my background, because I have been not only former prime minister and active in politics in Finland, but I have been also president of our innovation fund, National Innovation Fund, and executive board member of company Nokia. And in that sense, I have a background in technology policy on the practical basis as well. And when looking back, I will start by one rather general observation. I think that the European Union is, we can consider the European Union as a superpower of regulation. We believe strongly that we can regulate things and we can prevent problems by designing regulation. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. We have both success stories and not so successful stories. I can tell an example from a successful story first, which has also flip side. The first story is about mobile technology in the 1990s. I think that Europe, when being able to standardize technological development, made it possible that European companies became very successful and benefits for individuals and consumers became huge. And compared with the United States, I think we were more successful. Americans believe that when technologies are competing with each others, that will provide on the long term the best possible solution. In Europe, we believed in a certain level of regulation or standardization, which gave guidance for companies where to invest and how to invest. And I think that that in that phase, regulatory power of the European Union worked very well. But the flip side came soon after that, when digital content became relevant, software became relevant, and Americans were dominating since that mobile technology development. European market was diversified, or it was actually very much split in different national markets, fragmented market, and European companies were not able to compete. And the reason why we don't have any European platform company is actually closely linked to that lack of the European digital single market. Now Europe has decided to move on in artificial intelligence regulation in a way that we will have early enough reasonable regulatory predictability and regulatory environment available. And only roughly a month ago, 13th of March, the European Union Parliament approved the Artificial Intelligence Act. That is the first the first act in the world regulating artificial intelligence. By the way, 523 members of Parliament voted in favor of that. 46 voted against, and 49 had abstentions. So huge majority of parliamentarians were in favor of that legislation. It is not yet finalized. We still need the decision from the Council of Ministers, but now it looks like this next month the Council of Ministers will finally approve new legislation, and it will enter into force within next 2 years, more or less. Actually, when looking at choices we have, I think we have globally 3 alternatives. First is that you can rely on existing laws and regulations. Secondly, you can have AI-specific legislation framework. Or thirdly, you can decide to ban specific services, specific applications of artificial intelligence. US is more or less following the first option, Europe following the second one, and China is an example where they have decided to ban specific services. That is the Chinese model. When you look at the European AI Act and its targets, it has 3 fundamental objectives. Original attempt was that there should be balance between these three. And they are, for the first, to promote innovation. Secondly, to protect individuals' rights. And for the third, to ensure social well-being by using AI applications and services. And the idea, as I said, was that we can do all these three simultaneously, and regulation will make it possible to integrate all these three targets to each others. The idea is that it will be applied in everything what is done in the AI sector in Europe. It's not only for those companies which are Europe-based and who have service production or manufacturing in Europe, or who are deployers of AI systems in Europe, but also foreign companies located outside the European Union, if and when they are providing services for Europeans. And it's also applied to authorized representatives of AI systems which are coming outside of the European Union. So it's very comprehensive system. The idea is that it doesn't depend on origin of the company if it will be regulated in Europe or not. And this is from competition perspective, for sure, reasonable approach. Then when looking at the content of regulation, we have decided to have 4 categories. So regulation is dependent on the analysis of the risk, how risky certain services and applications will be or are expected to be. As far as minimal risk services are concerned, there are no requirements. The idea is that when risk assessment gives 0 risk or low risk, it means that there is no reason to interfere. Limited sector risks will have a requirement of transparency. So it means that they have to be able to give users and consumers guarantees that they will follow certain code of conduct. Then in the field of high-risk sectors, there are limitations, what you can do and how services have to be provided. I will list briefly what these high-risk sectors are analyzed to be. Critical infrastructure, education, vocational training, employment, essential private and public services, law enforcement, migration and border management, justice, and finally, which is very important, democratic processes as well. And in these areas, limitations are going to be applied. And finally, the 4th category, which will cover those services which are unacceptable. It means that they are providing unacceptable or even criminal consequences. Then critical question is governance and enforcement as well, which is going to be very important when applying this legislation. There are, for the first, national authorities, competent national authorities, which will take care of governance and enforcement. They have to follow the European law, but they are based on national authority. Secondly, there is established already AI office on the European Union level. The European Council has nominated that or will nominate that AI office, which has been established already. And then there is going to be a scientific panel, which, according to my idea, is very important because a lot of changes are coming. We are in a very, let's say, even revolutionary phase in AI, and that kind of continuous analysis is needed. And finally, there is going to be the AI board on the European Union level, and each member country will have a right to nominate a member into that board. This is the structure of the execution of the AI Act. And then the AI Act includes also certain exemptions. And these exemptions are for AI systems that exclusively serve military, defense, or national security areas. And that is quite natural that they are very sensitive, especially in today's world and today's circumstances. This is a very short illustration of what's going on in Europe. I'm very happy to participate in the discussion as well, and maybe to analyze a bit also those risks this kind of legislation includes. But in order to keep my promise to speak only around 10 minutes, so I have to stop now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that very comprehensive view on Europe's perspective on AI regulation. Really appreciate that. Now we will move over to India's perspective and opportunity in terms of AI regulation. We'll begin with Sharad Sharma and let him give you his perspective on what India is doing in terms of AI regulation. Sharad?
Thank you so much. I have a couple of slides. Should I flash them from my side? Let me do that. No, my sharing is disabled, but I see something coming up. Yeah. Can we go to the next slide and we'll come back to this one? Just for a brief moment, we'll go to the next slide. See, I'm not going to cover the further reading right now, but some of you may be familiar that India has taken a very different approach to digital. It used to be called India Stack. It's now called Digital Public Infrastructure. And the focus has been on, digital public infrastructure and private innovation. And that's been, very successful, and it is being used by many other countries as well. It was part of the G20 declaration, and it's endorsed by many organizations, and some of them have their papers, which you can read about much later. So let's go back to the earlier slide. I would share with you, in that spirit of India Stack, what is the current thinking with respect to AI. And I'll be rather quick here, so that I'll just lay the things out, and then if there are questions, we can come back and deal with them in the discussion portion of this conversation. So first is, in India, we're looking at AI AI as having two sides of the coin. The one side of the coin is to do with inference, and second side is to do with training. We actually focused on inference starting 2017, in August of 2017. So this effort has been there for quite some time, and our thinking about how that should be handled has been now translated into an act that was passed by the Parliament in August 13th of last year, and it is now in the process of rolling out. So a lot of what we are focusing on is on the training side, is on the model building side. And therefore, it doesn't relate to personal data, which is a solved problem for us. It relates to training data. So that's really the current focus as we go forward. And when it comes to that portion, which is to do with training data sets, models, applications that use those models, there we are looking at regulation from two perspectives. One is, of course, we have to offer protections to our citizens. Several of them were mentioned by my earlier two speakers, so I won't go into the details here. And the second is that we want to focus a lot on innovation. India has continental size data sets, and it is important that we leverage them to solve India's hard problems using AI models that were locally developed. So creating an innovation ecosystem for us is very important, and that's really been the success with the rest of India Stack in any case. So our goal is to thread this needle. We think US does a very good job of promoting innovation. It does a less effective job in offering protections to its citizens, notably privacy. Europe does a very good job with regulation, but often it is at the cost of innovation. And we want to continue this theme of being able to strike a good balance between or redefine this old tension that is there between innovation and protection by having both happen effectively. For that, we need new regulatory concepts. And those are the concepts that we brought into for identity. For example, one of my earlier speakers mentioned Morocco, which is used there, and many other countries use an Indian identity system called MOSIP, which strikes that balance between protection and innovation. Similarly, our payment system, which is now the world's largest payment system in the world, called UPI, probably will do 58% of the global digital payments of the world today. Also strikes a good balance between protection and innovation. So we need to do that for AI, right? So to do that for AI, we are focused on three new concepts. And these three concepts are: A, nobody can predict where AI will go. So we are going to treat it as a complex adaptive system and regulated based on the principles of regulating complex adaptive system. Now, this is neither an approach in the US nor is an approach in Europe or China. So it is a different approach. I was hoping that some of this regulatory policy would be released for public consumption this week, and if it was, I would have included a link for you here. But that hasn't happened. It is delayed by a few weeks. India is in the midst of elections, so things are slow. But if you Google, you'll find several articles about India's thinking, related to complex adaptive system-based regulation for AI. Second is that we think AI will necessarily be cross-border, right? And so therefore, we need to establish liability chains that will work cross-border. And we plan to do that using technology. There is already a discussion underway with some countries. One of them a European country, another one a big Asian country, not China, of course, but on doing pilots for this implementation. So there'll be cross-border liability chains. So for example, if you're looking at deepfakes, the deepfake may be circulated in India, but the application that created that deepfake maybe in country B, which uses a model of country C, which then uses a data set from country D. So it's very important that we think in terms of regulation as it transcends cross-border kind of situations. And last, and perhaps the most important, is this idea of techno-legal regulation. We've applied this very successfully in everything else that we have done, where to shape market behavior, we don't rely simply on public policy and law. We also use public technology to make that happen, and therefore digital public infrastructure. For data, especially training data, this is the public technology is already built out and is now in deployment, and you can read more about it at depa.world. So this is really what is happening. Some of this Indian thinking is percolating into global thinking. India was the chair of GPI till recently, so some of it has gone there. But GPI is unlikely to move forward because China is not part of it. So any global framework that will succeed needs China to be there. So I don't think it has legs in a big way. There have been conversations with some of these other institutions that you see. But right now, there's a lot of effort that is going in for the UNAI body that was set up, perhaps if I remember right, in November of last year, which has membership from many people. There are several people from Africa there. There is, of course, a professor from Finland there as well. And I show on the right-hand side, what is the list of functions that this body is proposing to do, and the level of buy-in that it has received so far based on various consultations that are underway at this point in time. So I will stop here and hand it over back to our chair and come back to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharad. Thank you for that quick viewpoint into India. We'll get Dr. Avik Sarkar to provide his viewpoint from an academic perspective. Avik?
Yes, thanks, Isabel. Thanks very much. So, can I share my screen? Okay, yes, great. Yes. So, just taking the cue from where Sharad left, it was very nice that he talked about the techno-legal framework, because what I will talk about is more of the public policy frameworks that is there. So you can get a sense of that. And that is what has been talked about primarily when we look into the AI regulations globally. There are broadly two broad areas that we are looking at. And all the nations, when they're looking at the regulations of AI, have to look at two aspects. One is the benefits of AI, which is the companies, the big tech companies or the small startups which are developing the AI, which is the AI developers on the left you see. Then the corporates were adapting it and rolling out AI solutions. And towards the same, they are collecting data of the citizens. And this is what their interests are. The other side, which is primarily been represented by the government, is the citizens' interest that we look into. I think you can keep there in the, yes. So, yes. No, you can stay there, yes. Is the citizens' interest here primarily what also many of you talked about. The data is a key aspect, and also associated with that is the risk aspect. The risk is very crucial. I might be taking an application in healthcare or education using AI, but if that brings in some harms to me, I will definitely do not want to go that path. So citizens needs to be protected from that ecosystem, and that is where why we talk about when we talk about AI regulations, it is so complex because it involves making coming up with the regulations which talks about all these people, and that is not very simple. And you as a country, when you're looking at from the US perspective, has to take a call on out of all these boxes, who do you give priority on? Like for if you take the example of EU, they have primarily given the priority to the citizens. Whereas if you look at the US, as of now, they don't have a regulations as of now. The corporates and the innovations, the startups and the innovations are on a higher footing as of now. But there is no right or wrong to these things, and this is for the country based on their current societal situation. They have to take a call on what they would like to give more precedence on. If you can go to the next slide, please. When we look into the public policy, when we have a regulation or policy, and again, this is different from what Sharad was talking about. Sharad is talking about a techno-legal framework. I am talking about only a regulation and policy framework. And possibly for AI, a techno-legal framework will make more sense. If we can control large part of it using technology, that will make more sense. And the government will have to do lesser on that part. If you can click the next three elements, just the next two, and I will just pick up three. So when a policy comes, particularly a policy is made by the government, they primarily look at these three elements. These three things should come together. These are the principles of public policy. Problematization. So if you have a certain problem in a country, you have a certain number of road accidents on a particular road, and people are challenging and telling that, okay, something needs to be done about it, and they are demanding it to the government. That is what we call as a problematization. So there is the citizens' awareness been raised about this issue, and citizens are demanding something is done on this front. The second is the policy analysis, which in this context will be more the technology readiness. Is the technology ready to tackle a complex situation like AI regulations? We have AI auditing already happening. The aspects of bias and fairness and also explainability already there, but they are still at a level where a computer scientist can understand it, but not at a level where a layman can understand many of those things. And the third one is there a political will? I'm sure there is political will, and that's the reason we are in this session today. So these three things should come together for a policy or regulation to come place. If you go to the next slide, please. Just go to each one of them. Yes, just stop. So these are the steps that we follow when we are looking at regulations in any areas. First is the awareness on the principles, on awareness on AI ethics and the need for regulation. Then come the principles, then the technology readiness, which I talked to you about. Then comes the legislation when it's presented into the parliament or the Senate, and then when it's passed, then it becomes regulation. US Senate has already had the algorithmic accountability bill been presented once, and there was some feedbacks been sent back to it from 2020 to a 2022 one. I think we are yet to see a revised version being presented in the Senate again. And we are all waiting to see what comes in the revised version. If you go to the next slide, please. I look at AI regulations from this car that you see. And this is where AI is. We have made a lot of progress in AI, but given the recent advancement that is happening in AI, we are still in this phase. We are talking about a device or an automobile which can take a person from A to B. And that is exactly what AI is doing. AI is predicting something based on maybe the next token or the best on the data that has been feed. It is just doing its primary activity. A few of the things that this car that you see in the picture might not take into consideration is the safety of the citizen. It might try to send a person driving the car from point A to point B without concern about the safety of the citizen. And that is where I think we come to the next slide. If you just go over there, you will see that we all agree that when you have a car, if you go to the next slide, please. Yes. So we all agree that safety is an important aspect of a car, and the seat belts that we're talking about today, in the 3-pill seat belts, there were other versions of seat belts which were there even prior to that. Here are examples of a few countries. We see the law is introduced, mandatory to wear and mandatory to manufacture. The years are mentioned here. You can see it's very early in the US. Just followed by that is the Europe, presented here with Germany and UK. Unfortunately, I don't have an African example here. Then you come with China and India, where some of these dates are as late as 2000. So we see a gap of about 50 or 60 years when in certain countries we felt that the safety of the citizens was important. And when US felt that and India felt that or China felt that was about, say, 50 years that went between them. So the reason I'm showing you these numbers and the dates is that AI regulation is what we all agree to. The principles are required, but I think each country might adopt the AI regulations at different point in time. Just because European Union has come up with something last year might not mean that some other countries will jump onto it immediately. Many countries had a data privacy bill for a long, long time. If you take the Indian example, India only had a data privacy bill a couple of years back. In 2022, in November, we had a data privacy bill. So it might take time for nations to develop them, depending on the socio-economic conditions and those three aspects that we see. Are the citizens demanding it? Is the technology ready? And is there a political will to look into this problem after the politicians have looked into the other issues? If you can go to the next slide, please. Here I talked about how companies are implementing it, and we see that aspect related to bias and fairness and explainability, which are to the core, are being addressed very little. And this is from the Anaconda State of Data Science Survey, which is done on a yearly basis. you go to the next slide, please. Responsible AI, when you look at the regulations, before you go into regulation, you look into the principles. Who are coming up with the principles today? We have companies on the top. They are coming up with the principles. All the big techs are coming up with principles. International organization, IEEE came up with something called ethically aligned design. OECD, UNESCO, European Union, BRICS, WIPOs. One is more focused on the intellectual property and all those aspects. And then all of the countries have also come up with the principles on regulating AI. These are principles, these are not hard laws. Principles show that we have an intent to do it, and that often is a good signal for the companies to adopt that path. From there to the regulations is the next step. And if you go to the next slide, please. Yes, we can go to the next slide. These are the principles that we look at from the Indian perspective. These are principles that came out from India in 2020, but we don't have hard regulations yet. Now, our principles talks on safety, reliability, equality, and ones that you can see through it, the transparency and accountability. And you will see all this align very well with all the other nations that they're talking about from the AI principles perspective. If you go to the next slide, please. From principles to regulations, we have come up with the Digital India Act in 2023, which talks about an AI mission framework, which will create an AI ecosystem, scale AI adoption, and provide opportunities for innovators and foster skill development. Some of the points that my other course panelists also spoke about. The IT Ministry talked about AI tools to receive government approval before launch, but this will be applicable only for significant platform and not startups, because startups is something that we want to let them innovate for the time being before we come up with hard regulations on that. I think this is the perspective that I have. Go to the next slide, and that is where I will stop for now. I wanted to share the ecosystem that we are, and just to lay stress on the fact that AI regulation is not simple, and it's not something that is like one rule that will work for all nations. It is different for different nations, and different nations have to adapt and decide what they want out of all those elements. I will stop for now and pass over to the moderator, please.
Thank you, Avik. Thanks for a very comprehensive view again from the Indian perspective. Really appreciate that. We are running a little late, but we're going to try to sneak in a few questions to our panelists to really follow up on their discussion. So let me ask the first question to Europe, because Europe's been really ahead in terms of what they have been doing on AI regulation. So I'm asking Prime Minister Esquaho, what do you think the US can learn from what EU has done in terms of its AI Act? There are obviously many things to be learned, but if you were to talk about one or two things that the United States that is trying to frame legislation in this hall and others, what do you think we can learn from you, from the EU Prime Minister?
For the first, I think it's important to recognize that regulation as such is not good or bad. Quite often Americans believe that regulation is bad as such, and you have to try to avoid all kind of regulation. Regulation can play a positive role if it's smart and if it's giving guidance for all, for service providers, for companies, for consumers as well. I think that in spite of the fact that this European model has its weaknesses, anyway, its positive side is that now everyone knows what the priorities are and what is accepted and what is not accepted on the longer term. So in that sense, I think the idea of regulating is as such an example maybe to follow. I have to admit that there is a risk as well in this system, and that risk is how to balance innovation, capacity to create competitive solutions for the market, and protection of consumers and individuals. that is difficult task, but anyway, we have tried to solve that. And second important part maybe is that we have also analyzed these risks and categorized them, because all the risks are not similar. We have fundamental risks, we have less dangerous risks, and we have minor risks. And I think it's very important part of the process that we will concentrate our efforts to those most severe risks and to try to manage those risks. And I think you have to be worried about the future. I was a couple of days ago in a panel in China. There were other foreign participants as well, and I was quite surprised how much Asian participants in the panel were putting emphasis on this risk side, and they saw that the recent development has shown that artificial intelligence includes fundamental risks which we have to be able to mitigate in some way or another early enough. So these are the key findings from European side. Even when, as I said, we have to also be open for criticism for the European system. I think this is not perfect one, but this is anyway the first comprehensive attempt to create reasonable regulation.
Thank you so much. My question now to Dr. Shiko is, you talked about some of the challenges that Africa faces, talent, infrastructure, etc. Are there any conversations, or are there things that the United States can do in terms of supporting Africa towards some of the challenges that you talked about, whether it's talent, infrastructure, and others? Or are there conversations being had, or should conversations be had? We are sitting here in Capitol Hill in Congress, so this is your chance to make a pitch for some of those kinds of things.
So I think on my closing slide, I had that. And we know as a computer scientist, as a researcher, one of the key things is talent will flow where the resources are. And that's, if you see the talent slide I showed, is most of the talent is flowing to the United States because that's where the resources are. In fact, when we are talking about to a number of African AI researchers to see if they can come back home, they're saying would love to come back home. However, we are unable to come back home because we have we need compute and resources to be able to come and work from home, but we want to be able to come and solve for African problems. And so for us, that is key, is building on the infrastructure part, investing in infrastructure, which is something that I know the United States is very keen on. And I've heard of rumors or conversations on the same with the digital transformation with Africa and supporting such initiatives. The second one is on the talent development. So I have to be very clear that when you talk about AI talent, I'm not talking about ML engineers and data scientists alone. I'm also talking about the bottom tier pipeline. And I love the India stack. And I know they moved away from India stack. But how the India stack did is they started building a pipeline of low-code talent and build it all the way to very highly skilled people. And for us, it's being able to replicate something like that. And some of the work that we are doing in a very small pilot-ish basis is being able to say, can we train data annotators, data analysts, people who are able to clean and transcribe data and ground truth data to be able to build and inform models that we are coming up with before we get to engineers who are writing the models. And how do we be able to capacitate that, which is the bulk of the AI talent pipeline? How do we start building that talent pipeline and capacitate it? Because you're going to be killing two birds with one stone. You're going to be A, solving for unemployment in Africa, two, including inclusivity as part of the agenda of the United States. So those are my two things, infrastructure and talent. If you can work and collaborate on those two, we'll be in a good place.
Thank you so much. Now I'll turn to our panelists from India. India, like the United States and about 60 other countries, is going in for elections. at least I can tell you in the United States, there is a big concern and there have been situations of deep fake and all kinds of other issues. Are there any concerns in India regarding the use of deep fakes or other voice recognition and other technologies using AI? So I'll open it to either one of the panelists.
Sure, I have to drop off soon, so Avik, if it's okay, can I go first and then
Please.
Yes, please,
so
please.
yeah, of course, there's a lot of concern. Deepfake is a very big issue, not only for political campaigns, but it is also an issue because India has digitized so aggressively using India Stack. And especially payment infrastructure is so widely dispersed in India that it is being used for phishing attacks and for all kind of societal frauds that are taking place. So this is a very big issue. And in the upcoming regulatory policy, one of the big focus areas is on deepfakes. And so that is going to be an issue. The question, as I mentioned in my talk, the challenge with deepfake is it's a cross-border issue. The deepfake artifact that you're talking about, a video of, let's say, me talking, may be circulated here in India, but it may have been created in another country, and the model that it was used to create may be yet in another country, and so on and so forth. And there are, of course, open issues. There is work that needs to be done to make sure that the persona of an individual is copyrightable. Currently, this issue is stuck in WIPO. But this is an issue that is resonating in the US as well. So the question here is my persona mine or not? And if it is mine, then if somebody else creates an artifact based on this persona and it's not authorized by me, is it a offense, at least a civil offense, if not a criminal offense? So this is why I mentioned that the regulation that is needed requires new concepts to be brought to the fore. And right now, the first wave of regulation that has happened has attacked it without that sufficient thinking on concepts. The only debate that has been there is on classification of risks. So, which is, of course, a necessary thing to do, but is grossly insufficient. So the three concepts that I mentioned there are going to be necessary, and and many countries will have to adopt it. Like with India Stack, we will attempt to show that they work here in India, because the general thinking is if something works in India, it will work anywhere else in the world. So that's the backstory to deepfake as well. So with that, I beg forgiveness, but I do have to drop off. So if with your permission, I may do that.
Since you have to drop off.
Yeah.
So, but thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Next time you can use the deepfake of mine.
Avik, did you have any quick points on this?
No, I think I concurred the views that are been shared by Sharad. So we need more trust in the ecosystem, and one is copywriting that we talked about. The other is more encrypted and authenticated users. Today, you can be a user on the internet, on a social media, without much of authentication, and authentication has been done by the platform. Using some national identity, and the platforms over time has to authenticate users on the platforms using national identity and keeping the governments in the loop. I think this is going to be primarily very crucial because if a particular handle or a social media is sharing certain things, because ultimately you can be sharing certain things on a Twitter or a Facebook, but it has originated from somewhere. We need to have track of the traceability, and that is where if something was promoted by some country which is suspicious, then that should be blocked in the first place until unless the nation or promotes or backs up that ID of the person. So we need to have a framework where we can trust something on the internet. There are two things that Sharad talked about. One was the copyright aspect, and on the other aspect, what we have to also see is that what can we trust, which information can we trust. But I think that is a long thing, because that is a mind shift change, because when about 25 years back, 25, 30 years back, internet started, it was a medium to express, and not everyone had a medium to express. But now we are at a stage that there might be some who are expressing it legitimately, but there are many other people who are expressing it illegitimately or putting in random junk in the process. How do you differentiate the junk from the true? And that is where I think this authentication, the blockchain, this sort of technologies will come in, and this will become very prominent.
Thank you, Avik. I want to thank all our distinguished panelists for providing such tremendous insight from the different regions. Your insights are going to really help the US lawmakers as they are looking to frame our legislation in the United States. So firstly, a big round of applause to all our panelists for their great insight.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And now we will have just a quick break, and then we'll move on to our next panelist. Thank you. Bye-bye to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we work with them too.
And then some undersecretary for science and technology, emerging technologies about the work I'm going to talk about.
Right. Well, hello. The moderator for our next panel, which, as you may already know, in many ways is a very important topic, ethical considerations around AI. And I'm very excited about the panel that we've been able to put together because I think you're going to get some very interesting perspectives. And with them all combined, I think will be a very educational experience from your perspective. Let me just quickly go through each of their bios, summary bios, and then we'll get started. First, I have Dr. Darrell West, Senior Fellow in the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institute. Dr. West occupies the Douglas Dillon Chair in Governance Studies and conducts cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence and technology policy. He is distinguished as the recipient of the American Political Science Association's Don K. Price Award for his book, Digital Government, and the Doris Graber Award for Crosstalk, recognized as the best book on political communications. Then we have Carol Smith, Trust Lab Lead and Principal Research Scientist, Human-Machine Interaction. And Carol Smith leads groundbreaking research to develop trustworthy human-centered AI systems for the Department of Defense, government agencies, and private enterprises. With over 2 decades of experience, she pioneers development practices to enhance human experiences with complex systems across diverse industries. Last, we have Lieutenant Colonel Paul Lushenko, Assistant Professor and Director of Special Operations at the U.S. Army War College. Lieutenant Colonel Lushenko, with a PhD and MA in International Relations from Cornell University, is highly esteemed for his expertise in emerging technologies and warfare. He is a sought-after expert by major media outlets, including BBC, Bloomberg, CBS, NBC, Sky News, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, and Wired. So, as I said, I think a diverse and very distinguished panel. And with that, I'm going to ask Dr. West to kick us off.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michael. It's nice to be here with you, and I appreciate all of the interest in AI. And as we heard on the first panel, it is a very exciting time in terms of AI development, both within the United States as well as around the world. Many important things are taking place, but at the same time, those very same developments are creating lots of fears and emphasizing the need for ethical and responsible AI. And among the worries in the AI area include issues of fairness, bias, lack of transparency, the possible impact on human safety, and the impact on campaign communications, problems of voter manipulation, and the risk of foreign intervention in our upcoming election. And kind of underlying all of these questions are the basic issue of who decides. And there's been, I think, a fundamental change in our answer to this question, because for most of the last 25 years, America's answer has been pretty libertarian in the sense that we've delegated many of the major tech decisions to the tech companies. People are no longer comfortable with that. They're worried about a whole range of issues, privacy, cybersecurity, and so on. And so now people are wanting more public involvement and public oversight of what is taking place through policies, laws, and regulations. And so the interesting thing is we actually are seeing a number of new approaches, both at the state and local level, and then a lot of talk at the federal level in terms of what needs to happen. And just to give you some indication, at the state level, there are about half a dozen states that already have passed AI-related laws. Much of the action has been in the area of campaign communications, just because of the particular concern about 2024. There are 2 different types of laws that have been passed. A number of states have adopted new disclosure requirements, basically saying that if AI-generated content is included in campaign communications, there has to be disclosure of that fact. It's kind of the same type of principle we have in campaign finance. TV advertising, in terms of who's paying for it. So it's kind of taking a familiar regulatory regime and just applying it to AI content in campaign communications. However, the state of Minnesota has actually gone one step further in going beyond disclosure to trying to address possible harms. So we've already seen just in the last few months misuse of AI in campaign communications. There are a number of female candidates that have had their heads put on the bodies of naked women in an effort to shame and embarrass them. There's been distortions of candidate images. So what Minnesota has done, and again, this is a law that already has been enacted, is to ban the manipulation or distortion of campaign images within 90 days prior to an election without that person's consent. And again, it's designed to try and deal with the deep fake issue, the problem facing female politicians, just kind of manipulating candidate images in the 3 months preceding any election. Just yesterday, we saw OMB provide guidance for federal agencies. We haven't seen a lot of action from Congress yet on AI in terms of actual legislation, although there are a number of bills that have been introduced. But in the executive branch, Biden, of course, put together his executive order a little while ago. This week, OMB came up with more specific guidance in terms of what it wants those agencies to do. And if you haven't seen it, some of the highlights were basically having every federal agency designate someone as the AI officer for that agency to kind of stimulate innovation, but also think about how to develop guardrails for the use of AI in those agencies. Secondly, developing AI governance boards as an oversight mechanism in terms of how the agency is implementing AI. Developing both testing and assessment requirements for the AI applications being used in that agency with public disclosure of the results of that assessment. So basically, they're telling agencies, go ahead, start to use AI, but let's monitor the usage, let's test it, let's assess it, let's see what the implications are, and then make all that information available to the public. There are some particular provisions allowing people to opt out of airport-based facial recognition without having to create a big to-do with the TSA officer who is at that scene. There's been particular concern about possible health disparities based on race and gender with AI applications. And so there we're likely to see third-party audits of the possible disparate impact as AI is being deployed in the healthcare area. Is it affecting women and or racial and ethnic minorities in a harmful manner compared to other individuals? Some people are suggesting the need for digital watermarking on AI applications, which is basically designating the originator of that information, particularly if it's a photo or an image, so that if there is a problem or a controversy, we can basically trace back the origins of that to the individual who actually did that content. And then the last key thing was an emphasis on workforce development. OMB specified that the federal government wants to hire 100 new AI specialists across the federal government just to help implement these initiatives. So we're seeing a lot of action in the executive branch. The last panel got into the issue of the EU laws, so I won't duplicate what those individuals said. I'll just note that what the AI Act in Europe is doing is basically mostly focusing on the high impact applications and trying to engage in risk mitigation of those particular applications. And Europe kind of defines the possible impact of algorithms on people. They're really focusing on applications that are widely used, which they define as having 1 million or more users. And so nobody really wants to regulate the mom and pop operators, the startup companies, small businesses who may be employing AI, but they're really focused on kind of high impact applications that have potential harm for humans that are widely used, defined as 1 million people or more. And to put some teeth into what they're doing, the AI Act has enabled fines of up to 6% of the global revenue of those large platforms if they find egregious violations of those rules. So in the United States, we are starting to see multi-million-dollar fines of leading tech companies in the United States. Europe is going much further, like 6% of the global revenue. That's a big number for those companies. I mentioned that in this particular election year, we are worried about the problem of foreign intervention in our election. This is obviously a high-stakes election for foreign countries. In addition to us, there are lots of countries that have a preferred outcome in this election, and we can just mention places such as Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, the Saudis, among other nations. So we really need to be vigilant about those threats. And I know, I think most, if not all of you, are working in congressional offices. We're seeing a lot of legislation. I mean, I'd say just in the last 6 months, I've probably done more than a dozen briefings on Capitol Hill, kind of across the political spectrum, Republicans and Democrats, liberals, moderates, and conservatives. Like everybody is now worried about AI. They're hearing from their constituents. They're wanting to know what they should do. So I would definitely encourage you to think about congressional action. We do need to kind of take up the mantle that the states and localities have started to do. There are two bad scenarios that could unfold right now with congressional inaction, which is in the absence of congressional action, states and localities across the country are actually starting to legislate. The worst case scenario is if the United States ends up with 50 different sets of laws governing AI usage. We can't really have different algorithms for Illinois versus Tennessee. It undermines the whole scalability of digital technology, and that's where we get the efficiency and the cost savings that we all associate with technology. And so if Congress doesn't act, it doesn't mean there's not going to be new laws. What it means is states and localities are going to act, but then we're going to end up with a hodgepodge. California will adopt very different rules than Texas and Florida. That's kind of a disaster for the whole tech sector and actually endangers long-term technology innovation in America. The second bad scenario, again, in the absence of congressional action, is there are a bunch of court cases that are permeating through our judiciary in terms of the behavior of social media firms, government coordination with tech companies, and other sorts of things. The problem that I see is if our policy ends up being made by judges, the types of cases that end up in the judiciary and that don't get settled out of court typically are extreme cases or cases that have unusual circumstances. We don't want to be making policy based on extreme cases. Like the virtue of legislation is you kind of look at the mainstream set of cases, possible problems, and then legislate based on that. If we end up in a situation where judges are making decisions, we're probably nobody's going to end up being happy with the outcome of that. So our goal in all of this is really to strengthen AI for the public good, turn the technology to our benefit, and make sure that we all share in the benefits of the digital economy. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Daryl. And given the format today with the streaming and everything, I'm going to ask one question of each speaker at the end of their presentation. And then I'm going to try to open it up to the room for all three speakers. So I know in looking at your research, and this is a little bit amplifying further from what you presented today, but I know you've done a lot of work around the future, a lot of research around the future of work. And so, and this is a little broad, but I assume you probably can make it very specific. I'm wondering, when you look at the future workplace, given the developments in the AI space, in the innovation and the applications, are there some particular to the workplace ethical considerations when it comes to AI that you'd like to highlight for our benefit?
There certainly are many ethical issues associated with the impact of AI. I think in the workplace area, when I give talks, what people are worried about is possible job losses. Is AI going to make certain people obsolete? And the answer is yes, there will be people who lose jobs, but the good news is there also will be a bunch of new types of jobs that will be created. But I think the challenge in the United States is what we call the mismatch hypothesis, which is people who are losing jobs may not have the skills to qualify for the new types of jobs that are being created. And so from my standpoint, what I emphasize in our work in terms of how AI will affect workers is just the need for professional development, the need for job retraining. Kind of our old education model was we would invest in education up through about age 25. And then after that, people kind of on their own. Going forward, that model is going to be completely obsolete. People are going to have to upgrade their job skills at ages 30, 40, 50, and 60, literally throughout their work lifetimes. And so I think the policy question is how are we going to pay for that? Like right now, employees pretty much bear all the costs. Do we want to maintain that? Is there a role for the public sector? So those are kind of some of the workforce questions that we deal with.
Great. I appreciate that very much. And we'll now go to our second speaker, Carol. Let's get you on camera.
And we've got some slides that'll be. Great. Yeah, we actually go to the one more slide. So a brief reminder for those who were here this morning earlier, and for those who have arrived for this the second section. AI is data. It is what the systems are made of. Previous software systems displayed data. AI systems are data, and that's a huge difference. And it really elevates the importance of knowing what these systems are based on and understanding that the algorithms are going to change how that data is presented and change what data is presented. But that data is always going to be created, collected, curated by humans for a purpose. And that purpose brings bias into it, as well as the historical nature. Data is always about history, it's made based on that information. And so there's a lot of bias in these systems that just cannot be removed. And it shouldn't necessarily be removed because we need to be able to track that bias. So if we remove gender or some other indicator, Tuesdays, whatever indicator you think is the bias in that data set, you're not going to be able to track it. So we always want to make sure that that bias is not fixed or removed, but rather tracked and used to show how effective the system is and where it is showing that bias. Next slide. And so for an example, some of you may remember our friends, the spotted lanternfly that appeared in many of our regions over the past few years. If we were making a system to identify the spotted lanternfly and we used these images of these different life stages, we'd want to know what the provenance of that data was, who took these images, why did they take them, what was their collection process, which stages of life were included, what data was not included, and what the recommended uses are. And if you look at this data set, if you feel it's complete, that's great. But if we go to the next slide, if there are lanternflies displaying their underwing, the system may not be effective because the data set was not complete. It showed most of the life cycle stages. It showed the life cycle stages, but it didn't show every example of that particular bug, insect. And so because those aren't in the data set, an entomologist would have noticed that, but I probably wouldn't have. It's not something that I specialize in, and you've got a lot of images of lanternflies. So it's something where you really want the experts to weigh in and make sure that you are including the right information in a system to be effective. Next slide. Is it? Yeah, okay, it's just not on my screen. So this is an example of a neighborhood, my neighborhood actually, and these stripes were painted on the street without any signage. And you can imagine it probably wanted us to slow down. But if you also consider how a semi-autonomous self-driving vehicle might respond to this, where would it be able to park? How would it respond to this? How would you want the system to respond to this situation? Would you want it to indicate to you its uncertainty? Would you want it to indicate to you that, you know, it's your turn and do it to handover so that you are in control? So thinking about how situations like this can affect the end user, the operator, the driver, as well as the other people in the neighborhood, just wondering what is up with these lines. So these types of situations are really important to think about and to prototype. It's pretty easy to put, you could even use toilet paper to model this and see what people think, or how the machine reacts. You know, these are things that by prototyping and testing it with the end users, you can find out how well the system is going to work. Next slide. So we want to reduce risks. That's always our goal, and as other speakers have mentioned as well. And the best way to do that is really to speculate about potential risks. It doesn't take much time to imagine where things could go wrong, and to talk to the people who are going to use the system, of course, to understand their needs. And we really want to understand how we can reduce waste, not build something that no one wants to use. So again, the benefits of doing responsible AI well are learning about these issues early, understanding what is necessary to help people so that they are able to do the job that they intend to do with the system, and of course to make sure that we're keeping people safe and their information, more importantly. Next slide. Okay. Can you press next again? I think something's not displaying. Oh, go back one. And then go for it again. One more time. Nope. All right, go back. It's fine. So this is an example of on the far left, you can see a engine light in the vehicle. And if you can imagine with an AI system, it should be able to indicate to you when things aren't right, when the system is not working properly. And in the middle, we have a diagram of a vehicle. Now, I could not tell you what most of those parts are. I'm sure there's some screws and some, you know, nuts and bolts and things, and I don't need to know all that. There's no reason for me to know everything about my vehicle. If I have an indicator light, I can use a system such as the OBD there and determine what the issue is. Is it something I can keep driving with or not? That's the level of indication that most people are going to need with these AI systems. They don't need to understand everything about an AI system. They don't need to understand algorithms. They need to know when the system is working and when it's not, so that they can calibrate their trust accordingly and know when to use it, and when to put it aside and use a different tool potentially. Next slide. Yeah. So we want to design these systems to work with and for people. We want to make sure that these systems are trustworthy, meaning that people understand how they work at the appropriate level, understand when they're not working, and can make their judgments appropriately. We want to, we want to make sure that we're planning for continuous human oversight. These systems are not like the CDs that you may remember receiving in the mail with software on them. They are dynamic. And so not only day to day will the system potentially change without anyone doing anything to it, but additionally, when they are retrained, they can act in ways that are unexpected. And so we want to make sure that the systems are being monitored, that they are being, that they're able to be monitored, and they're able to indicate when they have drifted, if you will, away from their initial intent. And by providing that kind of information to the end users, we make systems that are trustworthy, human-centered, and responsible. Thank you.
All right.
Macro.
Thank you very much, Carol. And I just want to pursue one item. And I know you've spent a lot of time in your research around trustworthiness.
Mhm.
And I mean, you focus on human machine interaction. And I think we can all agree that trust just within the human context is a very complicated topic on its own. But human machine interaction. And so Obviously we have some staff here, we're having policymakers, we're trying to inform their decision-making. If you could have a magic wand, I guess, and say, what are the top 2 or 3 components with regard to potential legislation or a potential regulation in the area of trustworthiness with AI systems, what would you say are critically important?
Yeah, I think certainly the data, making sure that we have regulations in place, which I think for the most part we do, protecting privacy, protecting intellectual property, and enforcing those laws, of course. Because that is the key. If a system is distributing information that it shouldn't be, then the person who owns that system, the organization that owns that system, should be liable for that. If they don't know what data their system is built on, if they're not willing to provide that, then they are not giving people the information they need to know if they can trust it or not. So the biggest thing would be transparency with regard to the provenance of data. And then in addition to that, thinking about the more harmful, as you mentioned, more harmful situations and making sure that those are, humans remain in control of those situations, except for very rare exceptions. So brakes and auto brakes, obviously, we all appreciate when those work, but we want to make those rare. In most cases, humans should be able to override a system if they feel the system's not working well, and we should trust people to do that. Can't stop crazy, but we can trust humans to do the right thing. Also, because humans have consequences, machines do not. And that has always worked as a factor in society, and we should continue with that.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, it's Paul. We go to
Break ranks. No pun intended, and come to the podium because we may have some slides.
Oh, you can skip that.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for coming this morning. I want to say thanks to the team for this kind of introduction to this forum on a really important conversation. Realize I'm the last one here, so we'll be crisp and provocative to keep everybody entertained and in live. So to me, in my research, it seems that policymakers, defense analysts, military leaders, and security pundits in the Beltway broadly agree that artificial intelligence is game-changing. This is especially the case with so-called killer robots or lethally autonomous weapon systems that can identify, track, and target on their own without human oversight, military capabilities, personnel, and so forth. And here, I think the reputed benefit of these capabilities is what we call reducing the sensor-to-shooter timeline to maintain lethal overmatch of our near-peer adversaries. So China and Russia, based upon the national security strategy, defense strategy, and military strategy. But despite or because of these expectations, my central claim today is that we, the collective we, and we're all invested in getting this right, are putting the cart before the horse when it comes to AI. We're hedging our bets for the presumed implications of AI for the shifting character of war, if not the nature of war in a military context. And given this AI euphoria, and people have talked about the hype surrounding this, we have not asked the broader questions that ought to inform policy strategy and military modernization going forward. And in my research, I focus on 3 of these questions. If you go to the next slide, please. First is, how do we believe that advancements in AI will shape the trajectory of war? Really, a lot of hand-waving about this. But how do we think this is going to adjust the employment of forces on the battlefield and decision-making? Second is, what do soldiers, young and old, because there's a generational implication here, think about the prospects in terms of their trust and partnering with machines, which is this notion called human-machine teaming. And then third is, how can military leaders, given broad policy guidance from you all here in the Capitol, maximize trust among our soldiers for human-machine teaming? And so in the remainder of my 8 to 9 minutes, I'm going to walk you through these questions relative to my empirical research at the U.S. Army War College, which I think may be informative about the extent to which we can trust or not these capabilities on the battlefield. Next slide. Okay, so first question is, what are the implications for warfighting in terms of AI development? And of course, there's a lot of people that champion the game-changing nature of AI, the perilous coming of AI-enabled warfare, was what Paul Shari said recently in a foreign affairs piece. But we actually haven't explained what this means. What are the implications for this on the battlefield? So I theorize in my work that militaries can use AI to make different sorts of decisions with varying human oversight. So as you see from the chart here, militaries can optimize algorithms to perform tactical or battle level sort of operations, or they can design them to conduct strategic level, national level decision-making for course of action development, resilient logistics in the Indo-Asian Pacific, and so on. And similarly, what we can see is that militaries can also calibrate the amount of human oversight of AI, toggling between more or less supervision, which is known colloquially as humans on or off the loop. So these two dimensions of decision-making and oversight suggest a typology, which I think is pretty useful and generative for AI that you can see on the board here. Let me just walk you through it briefly. On the lower left, you can see centaur warfare, going back to Greek mythology, which is about human control of machines during combat, such as the destruction of an enemy capability. On the right side, Minotaur warfare is tactical decision-making with machine control of humans, such that machines direct soldiers in their operations. Now, if we scale this up to the strategic or national level, we have mosaic warfare, which is strategic decision-making with human oversight. And then singleton warfare, or what some have called AI general warfare, which is extraordinary latitude, almost science fiction at this point, for machines to direct humans in terms of course of action development, resource allocation, so on and so forth. Now, of course, these models, they're not mutually exclusive. And what I write a lot about is drone warfare. And there's a lot of different patterns of drone warfare around the world that militaries, the United States, allies and partners and others are integrating in the same theater of operation or in other theaters of operation. So likely it will be the case that these will be integrated going forward on the battlefield. Next slide. But the key question for me, and I'll walk through the statistics here shortly, is what do soldiers, young and old, think about the prospects of this in terms of their trust for human-machine teaming? Now, we know that soldiers are indoctrinated to follow orders, right? And at the same time, however, their trust is not guaranteed. As Mike was talking about, trust is a complex, multidimensional topic. And so what does this mean for soldiers' trust in partnering with machines? And what does the generational difference across the military ranks mean for digital natives or digital troglodytes, which is how we understand, we think, young and old people respectively? So my empirical research using survey-based experiments among officers across the U.S. Army and Navy suggests two key findings in this respect. First, senior personnel distrust partnering with machines in terms of all forms of those AI-enabled warfare that I just walked through. To the extent they are trusting of AI-enabled warfare, it's for Minotaur warfare, which is really surprising because that's machine control over humans on the battlefield. And I think what this suggests is that they are inculcating a narrative that's being pushed by senior military brass, that this is the linchpin for future success on the battlefield. Second is that junior military personnel trust partnering with machines more so than their superiors. So we do see somewhat of a digital native dynamic taking place, but they also have a more conservative or skeptical view of partnering with AI, but we just believe that meaningful human control is a consequential concept for them. To the extent that junior personnel, cadets, for instance, at either West Point or the ROTC programs around the country trust AI, they want human oversight. And you can see that clearly on the right side with those two positive bars there, which is more support for machine use when humans are overseeing it in terms of mosaic warfare, especially. Next slide. Okay, really busy chart here. So if human-machine teaming, for the third question, is really integral to future success on the battlefield, how do we ensure that our leaders
politically and militarily maximize trust in partnering with machines. And this is not to confront the normative questions about the ethical, moral, and legal implications of this. So in studying this question, I find, to Mike's point about trust again, that there's a real tightly calibrated set of technical, of operational, and oversight considerations that, when brought into focus, will maximize trust in partnering with machines. And you can see these identified in yellow, should you have the eyesight. Go back one, please. I guess we can't do it. Anyway, so I'll just walk through this. So technically, what I find from senior military officers is they want non-lethal purposes. Things such as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. The use of a capability for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. They also want heightened precision. Accuracy is really important for these officers. And finally, is a degree of human oversight, what we call mixed initiative in this research, the ability to toggle on and off human control of these capabilities. Operationally, we see a conflicted set of moral implications here, which is consistent with the research on drones and battlefield harm as a matter of course. So the first is they want the proportional use of these capabilities in terms of the use of force against enemy combatants, right? They want to reduce civilian casualties on the battlefield. Second is they want enhanced protection for friendly forces. The principle of unnecessary risk, that we have an obligation as a military force to protect our own soldiers and forces. And then finally, in terms of operational considerations, they want high contribution to mission success. I mean, winning matters in a large-scale combat operation in a high-intensity conflict. The final component here is regulation. And I find among senior officers at the lieutenant colonel level or colonel level, they really appreciate international humanitarian law and global norm setting. And that's really ironic at this point, because as we've talked about today, we're building this thing in flight, which is why it's so heartening to see politicians and the administration looking at international norm setting by way of, I think, 60 or so different countries recently in this country met and had talked about this. What you can't see on the slide, but I think it's really important for modernizing our military, is this interaction effect between autonomy and purpose. When you have a fully autonomous capability and it's used for a lethal purpose, we see clear decrements at statistically significant levels for support. Whereas if you have a non-fully autonomous capability that's used for lethal purposes, you get increased support. And I think this is important for those who work in the House or the Senate Armed Forces Committee. When we're overseeing military modernization, this is about rolling out capability to increase trust and a clear dividend that we don't want these capabilities to be used in a fully autonomous mode, certainly for lethal purposes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what do our junior soldiers think about this? Well, their ideas of trust in this are relatively consistent with senior military personnel. But there are a couple key caveats. So the first thing, which I think is really ironic, is that they distrust AI when it's incorporated in ground-based capabilities, like a tank, like a Bradley fighting vehicle, whatever it may be. And it goes to the notion that vividness or proximity to an event is really important for them in shaping their attitudes of trust. And of course, they haven't, most of them, deployed before, so maybe we can see why this could be the case. Second is that they are more willing to assume risk for target misidentification. That's a euphemism to say collateral damage, civilian casualties. And I think that we can chalk this up to the potential implications of not being exposed enough to rules of engagement, which are derived from international humanitarian law. And then furthermore, an understanding of just war tradition, which is inscribed in the legal sort of parameters of the use of force in conflict. And finally, unlike senior officers, they appreciate international law and norm setting, but they also defer to domestic regulation. And I think this is really important generational difference here, because these are the soldiers, airmen, Marines, so on and so forth, that are going to adopt the capability and use it over time. And they want us to get it right in this body of legislation. Okay, I'm going to close with this identifying what I think are a couple implications for modernization policy and strategy, things I was thinking about last night. So I think that we need to adopt a vocabulary when it comes to really understanding the implications of AI on the battlefield. There's too much euphoria, too much hand-waving about what this actually means. And I think a typology like the one that I introduced, and it could be different. This is probably not the best. It's one stab at this problem. may be helpful to derive key policy considerations and strategy considerations in the military context going forward. The second point, and this is more of a conceptual point, is that we could get this wrong. This is not a foregone conclusion that trust is going to be there. Needless to say that AI is actually going to work like we want it on the battlefield. We talk a lot about autonomous drone swarming. I'm not even sure if that can happen in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years for a variety of reasons that we can talk about. Point here is we need a lot more testing, experimentation, and governance building as well. I think that norm setting, as I talked about before, is very important, and I would welcome further conversations like we've had with our international allies and partners like this, but also in terms of key documentation. And the final point here for the military is that we need to do a better job of aligning our warfighting concepts, doctrine, and modernization strategies. Because right now, what I'm seeing is a clear gap between what we think is going to happen, a presupposition of trust, with what we don't know is going to happen. And the warfighting concept in terms of building institutions of the military is very important to drive doctrine, tactics, and modernization. And we're a little out of sync at this point. Final thing I'd close with too is there's a huge educational component, back to your point, Daryl, in the military especially. And so we need to work with the joint staff, I think, and Congress can legislate this, to revamp our professional military education program so that we have a continuum of touch points across initial training, across the ranks, through mid-grade non-commissioned officers, majors, captains, all the way up to the War College to get exposure to data, AI literacy, things of that nature. So thanks, appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to any questions you may have.
All right. All right, well, Paul, for the question, I'd like to kick to you first. You know, your data and your research, you're looking at the military as an institution. You're looking at cultural patterns and trends within the military. And, you know, many times the military as an institution has been an early adopter of certain things within society as a whole. So it's provided a bit of a pilot study from that perspective. And so I'd like to go a little more forward with that in terms of giving you a little play to extrapolate from your data, lessons from that for the broader society. You know, what comes to mind in terms of the larger context of our conversation, the military's experience and struggling and grappling here and trying to get out ahead of things, as you say, cart, horse, right, as quickly as possible. Because at the end of the day, you're not the Postal Service, you are the military, and that means warfighting is function number one. But I think there are some lessons that can be learned in the larger societal context.
That's a great question. I may challenge the premise slightly that yes, whereas the US military has been an incubator for innovation for the last 50, 60, 70, whatever years, I think that paradigm is shifted on its head. And so Audrey Kruth Cronin, who was at American University, now at Carnegie Mellon University, has talked about the importance of dual use capabilities that are being not only adopted by the US military, commercially off the shelf, easily weaponized, cheaper capabilities, but also to great extent adopted by our adversaries, both state-based and non-state actors. So take two recent examples with Hamas in Gaza, October 7th sort of invasion there, attack, if you will, the use of commercially available drones to wreak havoc, right? And then, of course, we have to mention Ukraine and what's taking place in the veritable army of drones that have been built to level the playing field to some degree with a more capacious enemy in Russia. And so I think what we need, having said that, to your question directly, is we have to have broader public-private partnership, military-industrial complex, and you know, Eisenhower building's just down the street here, right? He'd probably be turning over in his grave if you heard me say this. And he's a West Pointer, by the way. You know, we need more partnership with industry in terms of the acquisition process to test, to field, to prototype more quickly these capabilities that are informed by a lot of the work being done up here in terms of trust, right? This is a mammoth problem, right? But this would be my sort of point is that we have to do a lot more experimentation, a lot more prototyping, Because if we don't, then we truly are going to have the cart before the horse, you know, in terms of industry pumping out, you know, pieces of kit, for lack of a better term, that are adopted by people that we don't want adopted.
All right, thank you for that. Well, I'd like to open it up in the time that we have remaining, which is a fair amount. So if you are interested in asking a question, I think we should maybe have you come up to the podium, if you wouldn't mind, for the benefit of our streaming remote audience, and just give your name and affiliation and address your question to whichever panelist. No takers? That means we have to keep having a dialogue. I mean, I could do that. Please.
Hi, Dr. Brian Pendleton. Paul, I have a question for you. Actually, two. One, are you going to extend your study to NCOs? Because I love hearing about what junior officers and mid-level officers are, but you know what runs the military. And then the second one is, how would you describe what I say is FUD in terms of the discussion about biological nuclear weapons being developed, you know, using LLMs to develop these? Because I have a background of that and I laugh every time I hear this. So I'd like to hear what your perspective is.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. You have a military background? Well, thanks for your service. Hopefully it was the Army. Okay. I say that my twin brother's a helicopter pilot in the Navy, so it's really more of a joint household. So I agree that we need to do more work in this space, a lot more work. And what's really troubling to me is that no one's actually doing it. And in part, that's based upon the assumptions that we're going to get trust right, and that soldiers, because we're in a hierarchical organization, we follow, as you know, structures of power, even when we're not directly, you know, directed to do something. There's just a presupposition we're going to trust it, right? So having said that, and this is the first stab, we do need to do more among NCOs, among even senior military officers that kind of bound the two extremes, because the sweet spot for me being at the Army War College was I had access to the data. So as you know, in your work, institutional review boards are important for human subject research. And the fact of the matter is, unless or until you're sitting at one of these institutions, it's really hard to get access to the data. The sort of representative sample I pulled from ROTC students, and this was a really rare sample, was by dint of one of my students at the Army War College having a cush-cush relationship with the two-star general who's in command of ROTC command, which is how it often happens, right? And so data access, just questioning assumptions and pushing the research agenda forward is really important. It's a great point, and it's a piece of bias in my research, right? The second point about sea burning, I couldn't agree more. And this kind of dialogues with my statement about AI-enabled drones that can swarm. We extrapolate that this is going to be the case. And there's a lot of fallacies with this. You know, first and foremost, I'm not sure we can actually do this at this point. The second thing is we assume that it's going to have important implications for the offense, may actually support the defense, if you believe Stephen Bedell at Columbia, and he's written a lot about this in Ukraine, right? And then the other dependencies with other systems and the sort of cross-domain implications of intelligence sharing and data and all that kind of stuff, right? So I agree with you on both points, and thanks for also flowing the flag a little skepticism in this space.
All right.
If I could I add?
Please, absolutely.
You know, just to ground a little bit more, if you think about setting up a printer or connecting your Bluetooth, I'm sure all of you have struggled with these types of activities, and you know, our tech is not there. And AI systems are still very narrow in their application. They are going to be very, very good and helpful to us, I think, in the future. But for now, there are just some major challenges with them. And there will be people doing, as I mentioned before, there'll be people doing nefarious things, but they'll be limited, thankfully. And there is a lot of hype about what, the future. But as was mentioned, it's not inevitable. We do not have to follow a particular path, and certainly machines do not need, nor will they anytime soon, be sentient or generalizable. Yeah, it's not happening. Not in the near future anyway. So this is a good opportunity for us to really do the right things and figure out how we want these systems to help us and augment our experiences and needs.
All right, thank you. I'm going to interject another question, but hopefully somebody else. All right. Why don't you come on up to the podium if you wouldn't mind? Just for the benefit of our remote audience.
Dr. Lushenko on this topic. I'm Sam, by the way, Sam Nathanson. I just wanted to ask, with where we are with AI right now, we know that we can't trust our current AI systems. We need to do more experimentation, more testing. I'm just wondering if we're putting the trust before the horse, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably better hashtag than I gave probably, right? I think you're absolutely correct. So to put more meat on the bone here, I'm often asked to review key documents, work finding concepts across our services, just based upon the research that I do where I sit. And I see it clearly across the joint force, an assumption that we're going to trust, these capabilities. Now, conceptually, I adopt a definition which is more social techno of trust, which is really important to understand. It's not about political legitimacy. It's more about an expectation that a capability is going to be used as advertised, pursuant to shared goals. Okay, so in a military context, and I'll be a little more, simplified about this, about closing with and destroying something, right? But there's a variety of things that you can do. That's quite different than sort of a social or political definition, which comes down to understandings of rightful conduct, right? That we're using force pursuant to any moral norms. Go back to your philosophy class, talk about deontologicalism and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think we are putting the trust before the horse here. Furthermore, this is not just a military problem. This is a social issue as well. So a lot of the research we've done at the Cornell Tech Policy Institute, where I just came from, deals with AI adopted across society, law enforcement, predictive policing, for instance, medicine, education, driverless vehicles. And what we find is sort of consistency with the military attitudes as well, which for me, it makes sense, right? Because the military is an all-volunteer force, it's drawn from society. Some of these concerns may be a little bit more acute based upon the risks at hand, lives, for instance. But this is really a societal issue to consider. So it's a great question.
I want to take a slightly different direction and come to you, Daryl, if I could. We've been focused today so far on policymaking around AI, different approaches, issues, ethical considerations. But I know you've looked at how AI is actually altering policymaking environment. So as somebody who's done advocacy and been around policymaking for almost 40 years and began way back when as a congressional staffer, I'm very curious about this particular angle and interjecting it into the conversation today.
Okay, that's a great question. All of you are probably going to be getting AI-generated communications from your constituents. If you already are not, I'm sure in the very near future, that will be the case. At one level, this is a potentially positive benefit in the sense that a lot of lobbying campaigns have basically been the province of wealthy individuals and corporations. Generative AI is a fundamentally democratizing technology in the sense that it provides a means for anyone, regardless of how much money they have or how connected they are, to generate videos, audios, reports, and other sorts of things. So for low resource organizations, it's actually a powerful tool that kind of levels the playing field to a certain extent. But the downside is kind of the risk of disinformation, fake information, kind of all the problems that we can already see. There's probably going to be a proliferation of that as well. So it's kind of a classic dual use thing, as Paul was suggesting in the defense area, that all these technologies have both an upside and a downside. And I think this is the reason we need policy and regulations in the area, because with every other technology that we've seen over the last few centuries, this is always the case, upside and downside. We use policy to try and maximize the upside and minimize the downside. We need to do that with digital technology as well.
All right,
Can
thank
I
you.
add something to that real quick?
Please, absolutely.
That's a great answer. I agree with everything Daryl said. I would point you to some research that's conducted out of Cornell by Professor Sarah Krebs in the Cornell Tech Policy Institute again, where they did an experiment. We did an experiment where we sent AI generated discourse to members of Congress and figured out statistically that congressional officials have a hard time differentiating between that which is generated by a machine, a bot, and then letters that were written in this case by research assistants. So this is going to be an important area going forward. And there's kind of, I think, a push and a pull here taking place that you may get inundated with AI generated discourse, but you could also, as he stated, Daryl, use it to optimize, make more efficiencies with limited workforce.
That's great. All right. Still have some time. Absolutely. Please come on up. And then
All right. So my name is Chris Kessel. I got a question here for Paul. I was listening to you talk and I agree with what you're saying about we don't want to use AI in the fully autonomous with lethal capabilities, right? So we recognize that, right? But like our adversaries, what's to prevent them from implementing that strategy, right? So we got to have like an international policy that we all agree upon, right? So if we're still working on trying to establish that here in the United States, and we're trying to get it, whether it's local or state or federal, and we're still trying to get it worked out here, we definitely have to get it worked out at the international level, right? And then also a side note with the consideration, I was listening to Chris Mayer, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Spec Ops over at Atlantic Council the other day, and he was mentioning some of our special operators are going to have to become trigger pullers as well as coding. So that's kind of
As well as what?
Coding.
Coding.
So
Yeah. Coders.
side note, all right? Are you able to address any of that concern there?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the comments, the questions in there. So this is a really tough one, right? Because what we teach our students at the U.S. Army War College, and indeed all the war colleges, that the laws of land warfare, laws of warfare matter. I mean, minimizing collateral damage on the battlefield, for instance, is a strategic, legal, it's a moral imperative, right? But on the other hand, we understand that our adversaries, again, as per the national security strategy, may in fact adopt these capabilities in ways that we don't want to, right? There may be a conflict. How do we balance the national security interest of protecting the homeland against doing so in a moral or more humane way? That's really a wicked challenge right there. But yet, the United States as a global hegemon, a global power for good, I believe, right, is making decisions to have human oversight as a first principle of policy and strategy. And so I had in my SOF elective, Special Operations Forces elective, just a day ago, General Retired Richard Clark, who used to be the combatant commander for U.S. Special Operations Command. And I asked him a question similar to your set of comments. And he was very clear. And by the way, he was in the initial, policy machinations governing DOD and AI, that there will always be meaningful human control. We'll see how far that goes in an existential conflict. And frankly, that's a normative question that I don't really broach a lot in my research, because I'm more about giving sort of a functional implication for leaders to figure out how to maximize trust. Okay. The other thing about coding, I actually couldn't agree more, especially in the context of special operations, which conduct these more sensitive surgical operations. And it sounds like you know a lot about this as well. We have to equip our even junior officers and NCOs with a vocabulary to understand data, its uses, its limits, different biases, to be able to ask questions, especially of ORSAs, operational research scientists, or people like me who have training in this area. To get this right. We were talking, sir, recently about retraining our educators as a societal issue to be able to understand Python or my coding language of choice, which is R or Stata. So I couldn't agree more with Daryl. There's got to be a reconceptualization of what lifelong learning means as a societal implication, but also especially in the military context. Because we're just being thrown left and right, all of these sort of platitudes about AI changing this, AI changing that. We have to be equipped to understand what it is we're talking about.
All right.
Can I add to that?
Well, please.
Yeah, I will say I do believe one place where the military is leading is maintaining that human in control as an AI ethical principle that the DoD released in 2020. Yeah. And that's a really important aspect of this. And the other aspect is that if our adversaries are choosing to use drone armies or whatever they are, potentially that's a weakness that we can utilize. We certainly would not want to lose control of our systems due to electrical failure or whatever it is. If they choose those types of methods, they may be out of luck.
All right, we've got time for one last question, and then we'll have Sanjay Puri back up to wrap up. Please.
Hi there, Paul. This is Yuvraj Puri. I wanted to ask another question of you. You talked today a lot about the strategic tactical uses of AI integration into warfare and in the military. I understand that there's probably a lot more uses for AI in the military beyond acts of warfare, tactical strategical decisions. In the coming future, or at least now, are there any other issues or points of human machine teaming or human machine trust that you feel deserve to be touched upon, given its implementation or its integration into the military, I guess? So less about warfare, more about the military.
And that's a great question, right? And so what you learn when you're going through these programs is that parsimony and complexity, they're incompatible. And so what I presented today was a really parsimonious 2x2, the workhorse of political science, but it's also pretty generative because I think you can adopt it in different strategic contexts, which is to your point. We have to take this framework, which was aligned against the potential for a high intensity conflict involving the United States and the Army against a Chinese military, right? Or a near peer adversaries, I think how we framed the survey experiment. As a first stab, there's a lot that was left on the cutting room floor, to your point, sir. So what does the type of conflict mean for trust? Is the output or results I got for this context different from irregular warfare, counterinsurgency, counterterrorism? Is it different in terms of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief? And that's just one thing we ought to study. And there are other things to study, the type of munition, which I did not vary, right? Different gradients of oversight, accuracy. Does it matter who is pushing the narrative on the importance of these capabilities? A combatant commander like General Retired Clark or president or secretary of defense. So there's a lot of things that you can do here. The main point of this research was to just identify a problem area, a gap that we need to continue to research against.
All right. Well, we're sorry. Go ahead and take it. All right. That doesn't give you much time for wrap up, but please. All right. You'll cede to the colleague, the gentleman from.
Thank you. Sunil Sabharwal here. If I could bridge between the first panel and the second panel. The first one, especially the EU, we all know kind of led the privacy matters with the GDPR legislation, but GDPR legislation came 20 years or so after social media, so it didn't curtail innovation. Now here, there's a different situation where we have the EU AI Act going ahead of really the technology evolving or maturing. So, and in the US, we kind of defaulted to GDPR. How do you see this happening in the AI space? Does the EU AI Act set the standard? Do we deviate completely? So any of the panelists, I'd love to have you.
Yep, I think that's fair game for anybody. So Daryl?
Yeah, I can address that in the sense that you're perfectly right on GDPR. The EU action, even though it was supposedly limited to EU countries, actually became a global standard because the tech companies did not want to kind of develop this whole protocol to satisfy that regime in Europe, but not the rest of the world. And so Europe kind of ended up setting the agenda. I expect exactly the same thing to happen with the AI regulation. Europe is ahead of most other countries. Sometimes there's a fear they're going to over-regulate AI, and we may end up not getting all the full benefits of it. But I think in exactly the same way, like the tech companies are not going to want to have algorithms for France and Germany that are different from India, Brazil, and the United States. So that will become a de facto standard.
All right. Anybody else want to take a stab or?
Yeah, I think we
Please.
should just be careful about focusing on technology instead of the outcomes. I know that there's been some discussion about that. The tech will change. It always does. We need to make sure that we're focusing on the actions of people and the rights of people and, those outcomes of the technology and not name specific systems necessarily, because we have seen over the past 10 years, multiple times where it's going to take over everything and it hasn't. And things change.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed moderating this panel, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to it. So please join me in thanking our speakers. I'm going to turn it over to our founder chairman, Mr. Poor.
Well, I want to thank not just the panelists, but all of you who came, taking up time away from your busy schedules, and also all the folks who have been online listening away. But also want to thank our team, our volunteers and the team, Michael, Liza, John, and everybody else who makes this thing happen, because it takes a lot of work and there are a lot of people behind the scenes online who are doing this. But I think it's really important for all of us to stay engaged. As all our panelists have said, it's an important discussion. Daryl said he's been here 12 times giving briefings. He'll probably hear 12 more because we have an election here. So not much is going to happen, but we need to keep these conversations going, and listening to an international perspective also is important, because I think we can learn something from them. They can learn something from us. But thank you all, and we look forward to continuing this conversation, and thank you all for coming and making this thing happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fly back?
Yeah, flying back. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I usually drive, but this is such a short trip.
Oh,
Yeah.
Maybe you can ask them to